In this little video, we are going to demonstrate looping in Coral. We're going to use a for statement or a for loop, and this is somewhat similar to the while loop that we did last video. The main difference being that a for loop, you typically use a for loop when you know the number of times that you are going to go through the loop. Whereas with the while loop, frequently you keep looping until you reach some sort of sentinel value. So for this particular example, what we're going to be doing is the same we did in the last video. We're going to compute the total order amount and the average item price. So the first section is to declare our variables, and we are going to have 4 variables similar to the variables that we had last week. There's the item amount, which is a floating point or decimal value, the total amount, which is going to accumulate the total amount, and then the number of items that we are going to process. And as you will see, we will read this value in as input. It will come from the first value in our input section in the Coral simulator. And then we're going to have an integer counter, which is going to count the iterations through the loop. Then we need to initialize our values just before we process our values. So we're going to input the number of items from the input source here, and we are going to set our total amount accumulator to 0. Then we're going to have our processing section where we're going to actually loop through the number of times that we have just input. So in this case, that would be twice. So the way a for loop works in Coral is that the for statement here has sort of like 3 sections. And this first section initializes the loop variable or the iteration variable. The second section tests it for when to stop. So this is our conditional expression. So we're going to initialize it to 0, the counter. Then we're going to keep going as long as the counter is less than the number of items. And remember that in computers, we often start with 0 and count up from there. So if there are 4 items, then we would count 0, 1, 2, 3. And then the third section here is the increment expression, and that is telling us that our counter variable, we are going to increment it by 1 each time we go through the loop. This could be another positive number, or it could be even a negative number. Then we are going to get the next input item into the variable item amount, and the next input item is going to come from here. So it'll be 55 and then 79. And then we're going to accumulate the total in our accumulator variable here, total amount. And then after we've done that, total amount is now sitting in that variable. And what we're going to do is to output the total and the average. And remember that Coral does require that we be careful with our case sensitivity, and so the put has to be capitalized. It's a capital P. The same thing for the get needs to be a capital G. So this is going to put the order total to the output, and then the total amount, and then it's going to divide the total amount by the counter, and that will be our average. And then our output should appear here. So if we enter execution, I have set this to run, well, I should have set it to run it fast. Let's do that. And then we'll run it. And we should see the total appear and then the average. So there's our total, and then there's our average. So that seemed to work fine. Let's do another test. Let's say 20, 30, 40. And this time we would have to set this to 3 because we're going to process it 3 times. So let's enter execution, click run. And there's our output and our average amount. That looks good. Okay, so that concludes this demonstration.